I just wanna have peace. Pay for the bill, let them take my car, never see the receipt. Good health, we prize, but everybody around prosperity.
What's up, guys, and welcome to the Livbtr podcast. This is your host, Jay Ciano, and this is the show for people trying to optimize every area of their life. Let's go.
I just wanna have peace.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to another amazing episode of the Livbtr podcast. Today is the first episode of season 2, and it's exciting because the subject matter here is a little intimidating for me. I'm not going to lie, but this guest is good friends with Erica Spiegelman, and we had to have her on season 2 because of the fact that I'm intimidated, right? I can't steer clear of those things. That's what this is all about, growth. So today we have Dr. Kate Balestrieri. Dr. Kate is a licensed psychologist, clinical and forensic in California, Florida, New York, and Illinois. She's also the founder of Modern Intimacy. So today, I want to explore some questions that I've had that maybe other people are thinking about, but don't have the opportunity to ask. So guys, this one's going to be interesting. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Livbtr podcast. I am Jay Ciano. I have an amazing guest today. I'm really excited for this conversation. So I have Dr. Kate. Dr. Kate is a licensed psychologist, the founder of Modern Intimacy, a certified sex therapist, and the host of Get Naked with Dr. Kate. Dr. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Jay. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm excited. So, listen, we talk about all things healthy lifestyle. And I have to be honest, when I started doing some research on you, I'm like, this conversation can go in a lot of different directions. And I listened to some of your podcast episodes where I'm like, probably not going to go there on this discussion, but I'm super interested in really learning about everything that, again, I could focus on myself, evolving into a better version of myself. Mm-hmm. And I kind of want to kick us off here. And we'll give you time to really, introduce yourself as well. But I read something that I thought would be a good spot for us to start. So the spicy truth. Sex isn't only enjoyable, it is also a secret weapon for improving health and wellness. Regular intimacy can reduce stress, boost mood, improve sleep, and even strengthen your immune system. I mean, if that's not, living better and all the things that we're trying to accomplish here, I don't know what is.
Exactly. I love that quote. The thing about sex, I think that a lot of people grow up getting information incorrectly about is that for a lot of folks, sex is this like compartmentalized thing that happens over here in either the dark corners of their minds or in specific moments in their lives. But sexuality is a really important and integrated part of who we are. So our relationship with sex will actually tell us a lot about our relationship with life and with the world and with creativity and with openness and trust. So sex is a powerful experience in and of itself, but it's also a powerful communicative messenger for how we live life as a whole.
Sure. And I think men in particular and, my peer group and contemporaries, it's something that I'm always thinking about masculine and feminine energy. And it's something I'm really conscious of. And, I think where we grow up, being taught that it's not okay to cry and, you have to, boys don't cry and, you have to be this tough, resilient person. And I have 2 boys of my own, and I find myself parenting in that way. And I think that as a result of, kind of growing up that way myself, my father's a Marine, single family home in Brooklyn, just hard, like the definition of hard. And it's, I think for me, it's been, tough to really get in touch with myself. Even in my marriage, it took me time to, really be vulnerable, and as I get older and mature, I feel like these conversations are so important because, again, it really, I think it's a combination of physical and mental and spiritual and all the things. And I feel like it's uncharted territory in a way, and you and I were talking offline before we jumped on about, the work that I do with yoga concepts and breath work concepts and mindfulness and all the things. I just feel like it's a untapped category, for people to go to a place and be able to get help with these things.
It is the places where people can go to broaden their education, broaden their horizons, are quite limited when you look at the professional spheres. Certainly, there are thriving communities for folks who have certain sexual preferences. There are non-monogamous communities, there are kinky communities, there are LGBTQIA communities. And depending on where you live, those communities can be more or less robust. But in terms of professional resources, a lot of the focus tends to be on what's going wrong in your sex life or what's going wrong in your relationships. And I really think that those kinds of programs are invaluable. And at the same time, I would love to see something that doesn't start from a place of pain or pathology and instead is more positive and expansive from the start.
Yeah, so I dove down the rabbit hole a little while researching you, and I'd like to know more about how you got into this field, and how you got here today. If you can give us a little background on yourself.
Of course, of course. Becoming a psychologist is my second career. Before this, I was an employee benefits broker, and I just couldn't imagine doing spreadsheets for the next 40 years of my career.
I don't wonder why.
Yeah. I'm so glad other people love spreadsheets. They're not my favorite. So I went back to school, got a doctorate, and at that point in time, I decided that I was going to be the next Clarice Starling, and I pursued forensic psychology. Spent a lot of time working in correctional settings, primarily with sexually violent persons or convicted sex offenders. I also worked with non-sexually violent offenders, but for the most part, my work was really organized around understanding the motivations behind sexual violence and the rehabilitation process when it's possible. So I did that for many years and then really grew tired of working in such under-resourced settings. It just felt like there wasn't enough growth for me. It was starting to feel a little stagnant. So I transitioned into private practice and started working primarily with folks who were struggling with compulsive sexual behavior or substance abuse and recovery kinds of dynamics. So that worked really well for me. I worked with a lot of people who, when I was working in the correctional settings, who were struggling with compulsive behavior or who were in recovery, not by choice, because of environment. So working with folks who were motivated in non-incarcerated dynamics was really fascinating and so rewarding. And I felt liberated from the confines of being in such an under-resourced setting to being able to work with folks and have more opportunities to introduce innovative and other kinds of treatment modalities. So from there, I had a private practice for many years, and I opened one group practice a few years ago with a colleague, and we focused a lot on trauma and compulsive sexual behavior, compulsive relationship behavior. And that practice closed in the pandemic, and I opened Modern Intimacy. Modern Intimacy is now been open.
Can you tell us also about Modern Intimacy? Yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course. Modern Intimacy is a group psychotherapy practice. We are currently a group of 14 of us, and we have therapists licensed in 6 different states across the country. We're always growing. And we really look at working with folks to improve their lives anywhere where sexuality and relationships and mental health intersect. So that includes a wide range of questions and concerns and goals. But we have a really amazing team, and I'm super proud of us.
That's amazing. So you said a lot there, and I want to unpack some of it. So I'm fascinated with psychology, and I watch very little television, but when I do, it's murder mysteries and crime television and all the things. So what did you learn when you were working in those situations with people who were
Mm.
essentially charged with this behavior, and was there were there commonalities, were there things that kind of led you to believe that these types of people ended up in that situation, and how does that translate to the folks that you're helping outside of the folks that are incarcerated?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I learned a lot of things working in that setting. I don't know that I would have been able to articulate this then, but in hindsight, um, I think there is where I really learned about how folks will weaponize sexuality to address other underlying human dependency or relationship needs. This is not new information, but sexual violence is not about pleasure. It's about power. It's about control. But working with offenders who had such a variety of offenses, and who had different conscious motivations in their offenses, I really started to understand just how fragile and vulnerable a lot of the offenders were. That does not excuse their behavior, but when I say fragile and vulnerable, I mean that the offending behavior was the way in which they were trying to prove to themselves that they were okay in the world.
Right.
Again, that does not excuse the behavior. But it did help me have a different understanding for the humanity of offenders, which I think is important when we look at the reality of sexual violence in 2023. 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, and roughly 40% of the queer community will experience sexual violence before the age of 18. So this is not an anomalous experience. This is not a rare experience. And what that tells us, and the majority of offenders are people known to the victims. So stranger danger is more of a myth than anything else. So what this really tells me is that this is the people that we know and love. These are our brothers, our fathers, our aunts, our grandparents, our neighbors, our coaches. And it's important, in my opinion, to understand the humanity of offenders, because that helps us understand better how we can work toward prevention. Prevention is the goal, right?
Sure.
And we can't do that if we think folks are monsters or villains or we cannot other offenders and then expect them to get better, right? We have to figure out ways to humanize them, much in the same way they need to learn how to humanize the victims of the violence that they bestow on the world.
Those statistics are actually pretty staggering. I mean, that's 1 in 3 females and 1 in 4 males is
Or excuse me,
definitely higher than I would have thought, but it makes sense.
sorry, 1 in 5 or 6, depending on the statistics,
Oh, okay.
males. Yeah, sorry about that.
Still, still definitely higher than I would have thought.
Hmm.
And so how do you think this is changing in this, kind of post-COVID environment where, I believe that so many people are dealing with mental health issues
Yeah.
as a result of isolation, and I think communication as a whole as a result of social media and all these other technologies that,
Hmm.
people are adapting to use and not actually being in person as much as they were previously. I think that, people, regardless of whether they're married with families, are generally lonelier right
Yeah.
now.
Hmm.
Is that affecting, are you seeing that? Is that a relevant statistic, or am I just making this up?
No, no, you are speaking a truth for sure. The loneliness, the experience of loneliness is more acutely felt now than I think any time in recent history. And it's because of a lot of the things that you said, right? Social media creates this kind of avatar gamification experience of humans that we all are subject to, because I don't really know anyone who doesn't have a phone on them at all times. So we have learned to have a more two-dimensional experience of one another. Also, I think we need to look at the political and economic variables that are contributing to a sense of loneliness, because when you have folks who don't have the resources that they need to feel safe in the world, they tend to get more self-focused. And that means they're more organized around a one-person psychology system, meaning that they can't really connect as well as they would otherwise, because they're more determined to just keep themselves alive and safe, psychologically, physically, financially, in all the ways. So that creates a lot more predisposition to an us-them mentality, which also keeps people really lonely and without the supportive community that they need, because everyone's in competition for these resources that feel so scarce. So we've got a lot going on, and during the pandemic, there was a pretty sharp increase in reported domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and sexual violence. And we're not really seeing those numbers decline just yet. In fact, 3 women every day in the United States are murdered by a family member or intimate partner.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's staggering.
Yeah. So it's a thing. Loneliness is
Definitely a
driving a
thing.
lot of
So
rage.
for sure. So I'm very, very into personal development, and
Mm-hmm.
it really is, directly correlates into what I do for a living. It's really nice actually, because the avatar of most of the businesses that I work with, I actually truly understand, what they're doing, what they're looking to do, and can be very helpful from that perspective. And similarly, in the personal development space, I went from, I would say, let's call it 3 years ago, being a heavy drinker, high stress. My health was, definitely not top priority, and so on and so forth. And over the last 3 years, I've become like maniacally disciplined. I was always working out, but I was not like, it wasn't, if I didn't do it the first thing in the morning every day as a non-negotiable, it wasn't to that extent. And I did a program called 75 Hard, which was 75 days without alcohol, 2 workouts a day, reading 10 pages, like, a bunch of different
Wow.
things. And as a result of doing that the first time, I really started to realize that there was so much more to life. And the more that I removed things, the kind of fake dopamine, things, and started to actually enjoy real dopamine by doing hard things and
Mhm.
being, feeling like I was rewarded from that type of behavior, et cetera, et cetera. The more I started to realize that, something like alcohol just didn't suit me anymore. And, I was always high performing, my definition of high performing. But once I became this version of myself, I look back and I'm like, you were wasting half the week hungover. How high performing were you, Jay? Right. And I say all of this to say that when you get into like the, personal development space, there's so many people that are like, it's really simple. These are the 5 things that you need to do to be your best self and become superhuman. And one of those things is always no porn. So I'm curious to get your take on that, because a lot of people talk about how bad pornography is for you to consume and how it affects your relationships. And I just want to learn more about that myself. So I'm just curious from your perspective.
Great question. The thing about porn, so I want to answer this in 2 parts. One, the porn industry is wildly problematic for so many reasons, and that's a separate issue than whether or not porn is healthy for
Okay.
someone. Um, Erotic material, I'm going to replace the word porn and say erotic material, can actually be incredibly healthy and worthwhile to have in a person's life, depending on who the person is and how they relate to it. Much like red wine or alcohol or cannabis, right? A person's relationship with the substance or with the stimulus is the only thing that will dictate whether or not it's healthy or destructive in their lives. Now, I hear from a lot of men that when they stop watching porn, they feel tremendously more grounded and more focused in their lives. I don't think that's the porn itself. I think what they're actually doing is challenging themselves to go out and create other hobbies, other coping strategies, other ways of focusing their time. And that's what's actually creating for them a different experience in life. A lot of men will ask me about the merits of semen retention. And I will tell them what the science says, that there is no benefit to semen retention. This is a myth that's out there in the world. And there's a lot of, I think, desire for semen to be seen as this like powerful source within one's body. And so holding it in gives them energy. That's not what the science tells us. So again, I think what's actually happening is that folks with perhaps underdeveloped coping skills in other areas of their lives are creating new habits, new hobbies, new areas of focus. They are expanding and diversifying the way they do life. And that's why they're seeing such a benefit.
See, I when you say that, I look at it as another form of self-discipline. So I feel like, first off, I've never even heard that term, so that's new. But I understand. Well, let me ask you a question: Are the people who ask you that similar in nature? Are they highly disciplined people that are looking to optimize all areas of their life, and they're asking you that because they want to know if they can perform better on the field, on stage, on whatever it is? Are these people that are, really grabbing the bull by the horns and trying to find any competitive advantage in life?
Sometimes, yeah.
Not always.
Yeah, not always. Sometimes it's those folks are asking that question to themselves and to myself or other sex therapists because they're recognizing that something feels missing in their lives. And usually where that takes shape is in their romantic relationships. Either
Right.
they are spending too much time with porn in their minds and it's interrupting their ability to be intimate with a partner in a way that doesn't work for them or their relationship, or they're spending a lot of time with porn and solo sex and they're actually not putting themselves out there and
Right.
creating the social skills or reinforcing the social skills necessary to have thriving relationships, not just sexual relationships, but also friendships and professional relationships. So again, I think it's important to look at the role that porn and masturbation play in somebody's life. And is it something that you go to for pleasure to enhance your life? Or is it something that feels like a default or a coping strategy, which doesn't mean it's unhealthy necessarily? But if it's getting in the way of someone feeling like they have the energy to do other things and create structure, then it might be something that they want to revisit.
Very interesting. Another term that you hear thrown around, and I'm curious what the definition is, when Kanye West has come out saying that he's a sex addict and so on and so forth, and you hear that term relatively frequently, and I'm always kind of questioning, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah.
Like when Kanye classifies himself or somebody else classifies him as that, and I'm just using him as an easy example because I've heard him say it on multiple occasions. What does that mean?
Well, I'm not going to speak about Kanye West. I don't know him.
I don't expect
his story. But the thing about sex addiction or porn addiction is that even within the mental health field, these are really controversial terms. And there is not a cohesive agreement among professionals around the validity of these terms. So I'm trained in both camps. There's a camp of sex addiction therapists. There's a camp of sex therapists. So I have the perspective of both. And what I'll say is that sex addiction, there's a lot of science that indicates that the part of the brain that lights up with other addictive processes is also in play for some folks with compulsive sexual behavior. Now, there's also a lot of science that says that sex is not the variable. It's not the stimulus. It's the ritualization. It's the compulsive behavior. Much like we might say someone isn't addicted to food per se, they're addicted to the ritualization of either abstaining from food or indulging in food. So it's important to look at this as, and with an understanding that the stimulus here is not the thing that people get compulsive around. What does seem to be a general consensus is that many people can get compulsive with their porn use or their relationship with partnered sex because they're using these medium, porn or sex, to regulate a dysregulated nervous system. And so that's where it can get compulsive, and it becomes a behavioral coping strategy, much like skin picking might, or disordered eating might, or any kind of compulsive behavior that isn't sex might be a way that they try to calm themselves down or activate their nervous systems, right? Depending on what's going on neurobiologically. So a lot of folks take offense, or they bristle with the term sex addiction or porn addiction, because there are a lot of folks who will jump to using that label as a way to avoid accountability for generally not living in integrity and not holding up their agreements relationally with folks. And I think that's where the term sex addiction has gotten kind of a bad rap, because there are a lot of people using that language to basically say, it's not my fault, I can't help it, it's a disease. And the science just isn't clear that that's the case. Maybe at some point we will have that information, but right now that's just not what the science is saying.
That was a great, that made it a lot more clear for me. I do appreciate that explanation.
Yeah.
What do you do to stay healthy and continue to live better? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's definitely an integrated practice. I get a lot of joy in my work. So I'm writing right now. I'm writing a book, and that creates some balance in terms of seeing clients and also managing the business end of my practice. I supervise unlicensed folks and students, so I give back in my work a lot. But outside of work, I do a lot of movement. I try to get to the gym. I've not been very consistent over the pandemic, but I'm getting a stride back now. So I do a lot of movement and exercise, and I try to cook and have really delicious food when I go out. I'm big in the foodie area. And then I try to incorporate pleasure every day, sometimes sexual pleasure, sometimes non-sexual pleasure, and just really make it a point to do something that brings me some kind of pleasure or joy. And that can range from, of course, solo sex to partnered sex, or dancing, or reading, or watching a new movie, or stretching in a new stretch, or playing with my puppy. Just anything that really infuses a conscious practice of pleasure into my day is really important to balance, for me, the stress that comes with doing so many other things.
Sure.
I'm trying to think what else. Travel. I love to travel and just go lay on a beach somewhere and rest and enjoy some vitamin D. Yeah, those kinds of things.
Do you have a morning routine or an evening routine that you repeat daily? Is that something you subscribe to?
I ebb and flow with that practice. But I would say my morning routine right now looks something like taking my dog out, having a wonderful hot piping glass of matcha, and doing some stretching. And my dog and I have a ritual called the Wiggles. She's a wiggly little doodle. And she just sort of wiggles around me and gets some scratches and eats her breakfast. So that's a really fun, grounding, somatic practice for her and me in the morning. And then in the evening, I try to read. something like a chapter or 20 pages, depending on what I'm reading and how long the chapter is. And I tried to do some journaling before I go to sleep and just really reflect on the day and set some intentions for the next day.
When you say movement, can you describe that a little bit further? Do you incorporate some yoga? Do you
Mhm.
do anything that I would know, or do you go to a Pilates studio, or do any of those things? I think you actually have yoga. You have a history with yoga.
I do. I was trained to become a yoga teacher years ago. I think that was 2007, and I used to teach it in the prisons.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my dissertation is actually about the utilization of yoga as a treatment for the long-term symptoms of sexual trauma. So I have a long relationship with yoga, and
Is it
in,
effective? Is it, I mean,
yeah,
kind of an obvious, question, but do you find that yoga is a very effective treatment?
it depends on the style of yoga. So the kind of yoga that I would recommend for looking at healing is called trauma sensitive yoga. Other yoga can be helpful in healing, but if it's not trauma informed, it can actually exacerbate symptoms of trauma. So,
Mm.
trauma sensitive yoga is really important for survivors who want to learn how to be more agentic and autonomous in their bodies. That's really the goal of trauma sensitive yoga. It's developing interoception, so an internal knowledge of what's going on in your body. And that becomes a vehicle for knowing what your boundaries can be and learning when and how to set them. So I do groups that teach around that sometimes, and haven't done one yet this year, but I'm thinking in 2024 I'll do another virtual 12-week group around this very theme. But back to your original question, I do practice yoga periodically. I go to the gym. Sometimes movement just means going for a walk in the morning with my dog and making it to the end of the street corner and back.
Walking's I think the most underrated thing on the planet from a movement perspective.
Totally.
I love it. And unfortunately I injured myself. So my knee has been bothering me now. This is my fifth week where I'm like not walking
Oh no.
normally. And it's like, it's really taking me off my routine,
Yeah.
and it affects me mentally, and the ripple effect of it has been crazy. And not being able to go for my walks, I think, is the biggest, negative side effect as a result of this injury.
Oh.
I could do other things, and I could still go to the gym and do things, so I'm
Mhm.
not completely useless, but I can't walk, and it's killing me at this point.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's brutal. Injuries like that can really have a huge effect, a huge ripple effect on your mental health and your physical health. I hope you feel better soon.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Where can you find this type of yoga, by the way? Because I work with a lot of yoga concepts, and I've never heard of this, and it sounds to me like there is, again, a need for something that maybe you could bring to the masses. But yeah,
Yeah,
do studios offer this type of
not
class,
really.
or is this something that's typically virtual, as you mentioned?
Um, I don't know any studios that have yoga instructors trained in this. There's some here and there, but the training is its own certification, separate from becoming a yoga
Got it.
instructor. So there are a lot of therapists who are not a lot, but there are a handful of therapists who are trained in it, a handful of yoga instructors who are trained in it, and you can just I think you can just Google trauma sensitive yoga and see what providers near you offer it. But it is definitely something that I would love to see take shape with more accessibility, because it's a really different approach to yoga. Even the language is different, which is important. And it's so wildly beneficial for a lot of folks.
And as I mentioned to you earlier, I saw you do a podcast with somebody who is part of the Othership app,
Mhm.
and I'm a fan of Othership as a concept. I just recently walked their space in Flatiron in New York City that's under construction, and they're great guys, and I
Yeah.
love what they do, and I think it's a really exciting concept, that people are going to really enjoy. And I do a lot of work with Breathwork Studios. I
Mhm.
represent a a company called Open that's based in Venice.
Oh, great.
And they have a great breathwork studio, and they do movement and other things. And actually, they have a sauna and ice bath component, and I do sauna and ice bath every day. It's a big part of my routine.
Nice.
Yeah, I love it. What are your thoughts on breath work? And, do you use it? I'd love to just hear your thoughts on it.
I do. I do use breathwork practices. I'll say this is an area where I would like to be more consistent. It Writing a book has thrown me off everything that I do.
I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I need to do that. So when I will be doing that. Like our
yeah,
friend Erica, I will be
yeah.
doing that as well.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a labor of love, and it's been certainly a time sacrifice, but a worthy one. But yes, I do practice breath work, and I love it. It for me is a way to completely open up and be in the body with, trying to think about how to phrase this. It Because you can decide the different kinds of breath work that you need in the moment, you can almost play pharmacist for your nervous system in a sense, right? If you're feeling down, you can practice different kinds of breath work that might lift you up and create some movement and activation and energy in your body. And if you're feeling kind of frenetic, there are other forms of breath work that help with grounding and being more present. So I think that it's a really valuable resource and something that I'm frequently talking about with clients to help them gain more presence in their bodies and feel more alive and contained in their bodies, because it's a beautiful practice.
It is, and I can relate because I've started doing it,
Hmm.
definitely not consistently, and I'm just very interested in adopting it more and learning more about it. Um, and I think that it's a good segue. It goes hand in hand with um, with psychedelics,
Yeah.
and maybe we could talk a little bit about that as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
I know that are you currently in the process of getting certified? I think you mentioned.
Yeah, my certification will be complete in October. So after that, I'm just waiting for MDMA and psilocybin to become legalized in the states where I practice. And then it will be um, something that I regularly incorporate for clients who are interested.
Yeah, and ketamine has become pretty popular in that space as well. Can you
Mhm.
maybe give us, I was going to say the audience, but I'm curious too, the difference and what, MDMA versus ketamine versus psilocybin or mushrooms and microdosing, maybe what the different uses?
Yeah. Well, the investigational use of each of these substances has targeted some similar and some different clinical questions. Ketamine is really been focusing on the treatment of what they call, and I hate this term, treatment resistant depression. Um, but it's approved for use to help folks use in smaller doses that can help with just breaking through some of the really difficult symptoms of depression for some people who have tried a lot of other things or maybe don't have the energy to try a lot of other things because the depression is so acute. And it's been shown to have some pretty significant efficacy. Now, a lot of folks are using ketamine lozenges and different routes of administration than what the FDA has actually approved. And there's more variability in terms of the efficacy, and a lot really depends on how someone metabolizes it and how they consume it and the setting that they're in when they do it. So there are a lot of variables to consider. And if ketamine assisted therapy is something that sounds interesting, I recommend only working with folks who have gone through a certification or a training program, because I've seen a lot of really wonderfully intentioned providers go out there and start administering ketamine or pairing up with folks who are administering it in the medical field. But there's a big difference in how people feel when the set and setting are more intentionally therapeutic versus more medically focused. So that's
Sure.
not true for everyone, but for the bulk of folks, I would say it's worth it to take a little extra time to research a provider who's got this extra training. It can make a big difference. Um, and then with psilocybin and MDMA, psilocybin's sort of being targeted for use around healing from trauma, addressing depression-related concerns, a lot of end-of-life related depression or
Mm.
anxiety. So the research is a little bit more broad and still developing, but folks who are looking to use psilocybin might want to think about, what's the goal and whether or not it can be applicable, I think is really dependent on the person and the kind of dosing process that they examine. But it's not legal in most states yet, so there's a lot that we're going to learn once it's legalized.
Sure.
And MDMA is the same, right? With MDMA, the investigational purposes right now have been looking at, or the studies have been looking at its application toward the reduction of PTSD symptoms. And they're seeing significant rates of resolution and reduction in PTSD symptoms. So it's really, really promising. And I'm not sure when exactly it will be legalized, but I keep hearing maybe sometime in 2023 or 2024. Um, it's already legal for treatment in Australia, and I'm hoping the US
Okay.
is not far behind. But
Yeah, it's
definitely
good to hear. I'm all for it. I think I think that's something that can really benefit a lot of people.
it can. And a lot of people bristle when they hear about psilocybin or MDMA as a therapeutic use, and they think that it's a license to go get high. And it really
Yeah.
isn't, right?
Yeah.
It can be mood altering, of course, but the way that we're being trained to look at these substances as a therapeutic modality is really different than how you might use them recreationally or how people have used them recreationally. It's a far more contained setting with facilitators, again, who are there to help guide you through the process. So it's not like you're just given the substance and said, go at it.
I mean, these things in the real world are not that difficult for people to get if they
Right.
choose to. So I
Mm.
don't think you really are going to go into that environment to just have a party. I mean,
Yeah.
who knows? I could be wrong, but I think that when in the right environment, with the right professionals around you,
Mhm.
for people that are really trying to work through trauma and open up, different areas of your brain that are not possible to open up
Yeah.
without, these things. And, I have yet to have that experience with breath work. I have heard many
Mhm.
people, and I've been in the room, with people who are able to, to get there,
Yeah.
and super interested in learning more about that. When I hear people's descriptions of, where they can get from breath work. Again, I haven't had enough experience with it to really, I think um, you have to get comfortable enough where you're not, you're not self-conscious and too in your head, which is
Mhm.
also why I have a difficult time meditating. To
Ah,
me, it's like I can't detach those thoughts. When I hop in an ice bath, I'm able to achieve that easier than I am just sitting with myself.
oh, sure. I believe
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
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 And I will say that the removal of alcohol for me has been the biggest life optimization tool. And
Mhm.
for the first time, I lost my mother when I was young.
Mm.
And for me, that trauma, I went straight to alcohol and becoming a workaholic. And that
Mhm.
was a great formula for me because I just numbed my senses and kept it moving. And then fast forward, 20 plus years later, I woke up one day and I'm like, this isn't really, I don't think that I've healed the loss of my mother,
Mhm.
that happened so many years prior, and removing those numbing agents and tools that were really convenient for me at the time
Sure.
enabled me for the first time to like actually sit with myself and
Yeah.
sit with those thoughts. And It's been an amazing experience from that point, from that decision point. So what would you say for our audience before we close? What would you say to them about, different things that maybe they could think about if they're looking to live better themselves? Are there any tips that you could provide for them?
I mean, there are so many things that can help with improving a holistic sense of self and an improvement in life. But when I think about maybe the easiest place to start and perhaps the most easy in theory, difficult in practice, but most rewarding is to incorporate a daily pleasure practice and to really
I
think
think
about.
everyone should incorporate at least a daily, one or two daily pleasure practices.
Yeah, and it can be something really small, like really sitting down and savoring eating a cutie orange, right? And eating it mindfully and enjoying every burst of the citrus in your mouth. That can be a pleasure practice. And it can also be something more elaborate, like going out and treating yourself to something that you may not otherwise do, maybe an expensive candle or a dinner somewhere. It can be something like sitting in gratitude with a partner and doing some eye gazing. It doesn't have to be sexual and it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be elaborate, but it does give you the opportunity to be embodied and to experience and receive some element of joy for however short or long duration of time. And when you start to invest in that every day, you start to treat yourself better and differently in other ways. And that is wildly gratifying.
I think that I need to take your advice because I am not great at that because I juggle so much
Mhm,
and am so busy that
mhm,
I'm not always present.
mhm,
And my own personal pleasure is not always a top priority. And then also on the flip side, as I explained to you my journey, I also like delayed gratification is a
mhm,
very important thing to me where, I'm also, I do enjoy life quite a bit. I don't want you to get the wrong impression, but, at the same time, it's like this push and pull effect where, I struggle with, do I buy that? I can
mhm,
afford it. I deserve it. I've worked really hard for
mhm.
that. Or am I a better person for not indulging in that because
Yeah.
people are going to perceive it a certain way? And, I don't really need that.
Well,
What are your thoughts on that?
what you just articulated, first of all, thank you for sharing that. I think it's a really common struggle that a lot of folks have around the idea of pleasure because we have in our culture developed this overcoupling of worthiness and pleasure, right? Our ability to enjoy pleasure only exists if we've earned it. And I would invite you and other people to uncouple pleasure and worthiness because we don't need to earn pleasure. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should just go on a completely hedonistic spree in life, but I think that we do need to move away from this idea of deprivation, even if it's a performance of deprivation, as a, a marker of morality and goodness, and instead move to how can I exercise increments of pleasure because pleasure is a human right, right? And none of us need to earn it in order to experience it.
You gave me a lot to think about. That is, it's yeah, I mean, I'm happy to hear what you said. It's profound. I think I know I need to hear it. I think a lot of people do. Um, and it's it's important because at the end of the day, we're here for a short amount of time in the grand scheme of things. And, we all are chasing success where
Mhm.
we want validation, we want all the things, and
Mhm.
sometimes we're not giving ourselves enough grace
Yeah.
to even enjoy the things we, have accumulated along the way. And I know I struggle with that. And it's a great reminder. It's a great piece of advice.
Yeah. Good.
I appreciate it. So where can everybody find you?
Probably the best place would be modernintimacy.com, my website, or folks can find me on YouTube at Modern Intimacy or on TikTok and Instagram at Dr. Kate Balestrieri.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Dr. Kate. This was an amazing conversation. I got a lot out of it, and I really look forward to keeping in touch.
I would love that. Thank you again for inviting me on your show. This was wonderful.
Thank you.